It even says it on the mug. Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, first part thereof, the 18th of January 2024. My goodness, time is flying, getting closer to my intended date for leaving the UK for Ukraine. Should be exciting, nerve-wracking. Let's get to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, and there are some pretty large numbers today. 780 personnel lost is fairly significant, not the highest end of the range we've seen, but across most of these other categories, 21 tanks, 38 APVs, armored personnel vehicles of different types, 24 artillery systems, 2 multiple launch rocket systems. Those are high numbers, 39 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 13 pieces of special equipment. The Russians must be doing some pretty hefty maneuvers at the moment in places along the front line. We've seen columns attacking in Avdiivka. We know that the Sinkivka area is pretty hot, area to the west of Crimea and northwest of Crimea is pretty hot as well. And of course, you've got Krinky and the rest of the front line too. Novomykhailivka, Mariinka. There's a lot going on at the moment. And in most of those places, almost all of them, it's the Russians who are attacking. And given that attacking stance, they are going to be offering lots of their vehicles up to the Ukrainians to target. And the Ukrainians, even though they have a lack of ammunition, do a pretty good job, particularly with drones, in taking these bits of kit out. 38 APVs lost in the day is a really heavy number for the Russians. I think that's double the average over the war. 21 tanks as well is well above the average. That is a challenging day for the Russians. What does Andrew Perpetua show in his latest figures in scouring the internet and the socials to see what has been destroyed? It's about a 2-to-1 loss ratio, maybe a little less than that, which is good for the Ukrainians, but probably not quite enough given the ratios that they really need and the amount of equipment the Russians have. If we look at what the Ukrainians have lost, there is a Miklik, likely used to break ice in the river for boats to pass. Interesting engineering vehicle. That's a Max Pro, which is a mine-resistant ambush protection vehicle with a Miklik. I don't know, is that attached to it? A boat destroyed as well, and a few bits of artillery, unknown tank, T-72 tank, and some other bits and pieces. Also tank decoy, so you can really take that off the list. Although it does question mark whether it is definitely a decoy. Sometimes it's difficult to tell. So not crazy high value stuff there, to be honest. Let's look at the Russian losses. They've lost a Mi-8 helicopter. That's taken down by Powerline. I'll show you that soon. That's actually not in Ukraine. Air defense, an OSA air defense system destroyed. Some surveillance and comms equipment. A recovery vehicle, another Brem 1 lost. Or abandoned here. Another engineering vehicle, just a tractor. A number of tanks, T-80 and T-72s. Number of infantry fighting vehicles, mainly BMP-2s and 3s. As I mentioned before, only one BMP-1. I think that is showing a change in what the Russians are refurbishing, and a number of APCs. So I think there's a much greater loss for the Russians in terms of value and sheer numbers as well there. Right, we'll go first of all to something that's just coming out now. So a Russian patrol ship has been sunk in Sevastopol, not in the last 24 hours though, interestingly. So it's been reported by Atesh. They are the, I think, predominantly Tatar guerrilla movement inside Crimea. They've reported that a ship has been found during a survey of ships in Sevastopol. So obviously, it's really important for intelligence on the ground as well as satellite to survey the port of Sevastopol to see what ships are in, to see what potential targets there might be. And I'm sure they'll be feeding that information back to the Ukrainians in a very direct fashion. But here we find it on social media that there is a patrol ship that has been sunk that is in the port but had not been communicated. The Russians hadn't admitted it or anything. It was likely hit during an attack with the marine drones on the military facilities of the invaders a few weeks ago. The Russians decided to stay silent about the downed ship. Max 23 says it's called the Tarantul. It's a Russian patrol ship. And it was at the pier in Graska Bay. Partisans assumed that it could have been damaged during an attack of a few weeks ago, as mentioned. So that is pretty significant, and that is yet again another maritime loss for the Russians to add to their kind of Black Sea Fleet woes. Now, the helicopter that Andrew Perpetua was talking about is this one as a result of an emergency landing. The Russian helicopter on the section of the M3 highway near Sevsky district of the Bryansk region. A high voltage power line was cut, so that's not going to help their energy woes. But yeah, you can see that there's some fairly significant damage to the tail of that helicopter, and whether crash landing caused any further damage, I don't know. But that's obviously taking that helicopter out of action for some time. Good news, the more that the Russians fly into power lines, the better it is, as far as I'm concerned. So that is another Russian loss there. Now, the other night, a Franken-SAM was used for the first time, apparently. So this is the joint venture between the Ukrainians and the Americans, I believe, where they are trying to kit out old Soviet-era kit that is more numerous, but with missiles that are NATO missiles, because they can't build Soviet-era missiles for air defense. They need to come from Russia, and obviously Russia aren't going to be providing Ukraine with them. So there's this Franken-SAM project of, creating, for example, we know that the Buk launcher has been able to be adapted, so all the missiles adapted so that you can fire these RIM-7, the Sea Sparrow missiles that are normally fired from from a ship, air defense from a ship, but now being either or both of those entities have been jigged with, so that in fact, as it says here, RIM-7 Sea Sparrow missiles can be fired from the Buk. AIM-9M air-to-air missiles, also with Soviet radars, etc., etc. So, that is good news that they have been used for the first time to effect, according to the head of Ministry of Strategic Industry, Kamishin. He's a guy with a top knot, just to remind you. Good news. The Russian aircraft A-50, so just to pop back into this story, was shot down thanks to a complex missile trap, according to Forbes. So we're going to pop into this Forbes article. I'm not going to read you the summary there. I'm actually going to go directly from the source. Forbes, I'm really impressed with Forbes, actually. They are the only mainstream media outlet that keep pumping out, and it's mainly this chap, David Axe. I might try and contact him on Twitter or something, just say, nice one, mate. They are pumping out, articles that are keeping Ukraine in the public eye, but also talking about stuff that's important. So when Ukraine had these successes, and sometimes they go under the radar, it's Forbes that seem to be doing a good job of saying, no, we need to talk about this. Anyway, so how did these planes get shot down? Well, particularly this A-50, four-engine A-50 with a top-mounted radar. Analyst Tom Cooper, who's written many books about Soviet and Russian warplanes, has a theory. So this is just a theory. Take it for what it is, a theory about what might have happened. Ukrainian radar and missile crews lured the Russian crews into a trap, he says. If Cooper's theory is correct, the Ukrainians set the trap on Saturday when Ukrainian Air Force jets, presumably Su-24 bombers, struck Russian Air Force installations across the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula. Quote, a number of radars were knocked out, Cooper reported. The Saturday strikes, the latest in a long campaign of Ukrainian raids on Russian defences in Crimea, suppressed the Russians' ground-based radar coverage, leaving the surviving missile batteries on the peninsula partially blind, especially to the north, where the terrain could mask incoming Ukrainian planes, drones, and missiles. So Russian commanders did the obvious but stupid thing. They ordered one of their remaining A-50U radar planes, which normally fly far to the south over the Sea of Azov, to push further north in order to extend radar coverage over most of Crimea. An A-50's rotating radar can see airplane-sized targets nearly 200 miles away. This all sounds really plausible at the moment. I mean, we know that they did hit those radars, and the Russians will need that radar capability still. A four-prop Ilyushin Il A 22M airborne command post with around 10 crew aboard accompanied the A-50. The Il-22 is a radio relay platform. Its crew assists the A-50's crew by handling communications and data transfer for which the A-50 lacks the power and processing. Satellite imagery and radar data seem to place the A-50's northernmost flight path over occupied Berdyansk just 75 miles from the front line. That's within range of the single Patriot surface-to-air missile battery out of 3 in the arsenal that the Ukrainian Air Force has deployed along the southern front. The trick was for the Ukrainians to target the A-50 and its accompanying Il-22 without giving the Russian crews too much advance notice of the attack and without sacrificing their precious Patriot system. Just as a sidebar, someone was mentioning this in my thread yesterday, and when we've just had note that the Franken-SAM systems have just worked for the first time, someone was saying that they could have adapted a Patriot missile to a Ukrainian air defense, so you wouldn't have to move a whole Patriot battery and all those gubbins down to the front line, which is really high risk. You can move some other air defense system, standalone launcher or similar, some other smaller battery or not as valuable battery that is Franken-SAM. So could they have adapted a Patriot in a Franken-SAM way? I don't know. It could fit into this theory. Anyway, it's just massively speculative. Quote, all Ukrainians had to do was secretly deploy a suitable SAM system to target the 2 aircraft from long range, Cooper wrote. Perhaps this is one of the Air Force's S-300 SAM systems, perhaps one of the Air Force's PAC-2 or 3 SAM systems, that's a Patriot system. It is also possible that Ukrainians had deployed a launcher and a radar, plus power supply equipment from one of their PAC-2 or 3 SAM systems in combination with one of their S-300 radars. So there's the idea that actually you could take bits and pieces of a Patriot system without moving the whole battery down, just elements of that, and combine it with elements of existing Soviet equipment so that you're not being as risky in terms of losing a whole Patriot battery. So again, all of this is fairly, well, yes, speculative, but plausible. And also, if this kind of thing has happened, that's really good news for Ukraine. It widens the variety of stuff they have and can do. Anyway, there's some evidence of an S-3 Patriot team-up. A Russian Air Force Su-34 fighter bomber reportedly detected a previously unknown Ukrainian S-300 battery switching on its radar in the minutes before the A-50 and Il-22 were hit. If the S-300 battery did the initial illumination, it must have passes along target tracks to a nearby hidden Patriot battery. Quote, the latter powered up its radar for only a few seconds, long enough to obtain its own targeting data, but too short for the Russians to dependably detect its emissions and assess them as a threat. And the problem is for any radar system is you want them on the whole time because you want to be detecting targets the whole time, right? But the longer you have them on, the more you are signposting that you are there, because the radar will send up radar emissions that counter battery can pick up, or planes can pick up. So you want to use them, but the more you use them, the more risky it is for them, and the more likely they are to be destroyed, and that's the challenge. And then the Ukrainians started firing their missiles. A minute later, missiles exploded, destroying the A-50 and damaging the Il-22. Quote, with their fire action cover, Cooper wrote, the Ukrainian S-300 and PAC-2-3 crews promptly ceased emitting and started picking up their systems to move them away and thus avoid any possible Russian retaliation. Down one A-50, the Russian Air Force may have just 2 of the jets left. The other 6 A-50s reportedly are in need of upgrade and overhaul. There are different claims about this. I think the UK Defence Intelligence the other day actually put on a line how many, it might be Il-22s, saying they had definitely like 8 of those left. There are different numbers. On paper, they've got not a huge amount of these, but they've got a number of these. But most people say that what you have on paper is not what is flying at any one time. And so you could take possibly 30% of that off. And it could be, here even more so, the claim here is that they really don't have very many of these left. Russian Air Force may just have 2 operational jets left. Unless the Air Force is willing to risk the last 2 flyable A-50s, it must make peace with its new inability to provide radar coverage over all of Crimea. It must, in other words, accept the risk of continuing, indeed escalating, Ukrainian missile attacks on Russian forces on the peninsula. I'm quite surprised we haven't seen attacks on Crimea. At least we haven't heard about attacks on Crimea in the last 24, 48 hours since this, because you would have thought that's a prime time to hit Crimea. Maybe it's that the Ukrainians just don't have those missiles down there. Again, just like I'm claiming with Russia, the Ukrainians are firing the missiles at the rate they're probably producing them or procuring them or moving them around. There's probably a set amount of them. And, you know, if you're going to do a big wave attack on Crimea, it takes a bit of time to stockpile those, and it could be that the A-50 and Il-22 was a kind of opportunistic strike, not part of a larger, right, we're going to take these planes out at this point, and then after that we're going to attack Crimea because they won't have the radar capability. It's like, quick, those planes are there, we can hit them, let's turn that radar on, quick, we can hit them, okay, fire those missiles, bish bash bosh, they're done. Right, now they're going to be weak in Crimea, we need to get the missiles down, ready for another big attack on Crimea that we weren't otherwise planning for another week also. I don't know, who knows. If there's any comfort for the Russians, it might be that the Ukrainian Air Force does not have a limitless supply of PAC-2 missiles, so the ones that can take those planes out, unless and until pro-Russian Republicans in the US Congress we'll be talking more about that later, approved the $61 billion in fresh aid to Ukraine that US President Joe Biden has proposed. The Ukrainians may need to begin rationing their missiles and taking fewer chances on ambitious missile traps. It's interesting. Forbes is not like, Forbes is a pro-business. You would assume it's leaning more Republican. But yeah, David Axe is obviously taking an axe to the Congress there, and particularly the Republicans. Right. Okay. War Translated, Dmitry there says the eagerness with which Vatnik, so Russian pro-Kremlin voices, are forcing the idea that the A-50 was taken down by their own air defense tells me that, at least in its conception, the method described in the Forbes article is true. They're ashamed of getting into the trap and losing the ability to provide radar coverage all over Crimea. Now, there's something to say about this. So, first of all, as I said the other day, I think it's better for the Russian narrative if they say they shot it down. They would prefer, I mean, it sounds bizarre, they would prefer their own incompetence than admitting the competence of the Ukrainians, and indeed that the Ukrainians got hold of these really good missiles that the Russians can't do anything about. So they'd much rather say, oh, we shot our own stuff down. Someone did say this on one of my threads the other day, and sorry I've forgotten who it was, but they said, actually, one bit of evidence that could support it was the Russians shooting down their own planes, was that they didn't retaliate. So I say expect a big wave of missiles and drones, and we didn't see that from the Russians the next day. We have seen a wave of drones, in fact 2 nights of drones. So to come back, so the idea is that because they didn't have a massive missile attack, a vengeful attack that they normally do when they lose high value equipment, suggests that they probably shot down their own rather than it was Ukrainians. They're not taking it out on the Ukrainians because it wasn't them that did it. So that's an interesting theory. Again, this is just a theory. But then the counter to that could be that they just don't have the missiles. Because as I keep saying, we've had, and I'll talk about this in a second, but there's another wave of Shaheeds last night that was not accompanied by missiles. Shaheeds are used best when they take out air defense stockpiles of air defense weapons, right? So you use them as a sacrifice, find out the best routes, they get taken out, and then you send in straight away afterwards the air defense, the missiles and the Kinzhals and the anti-ship missiles and whatever it is, semi-ballistic missiles, send them all in because you've paved the way with your Shaheed uses. But we've had 2 nights of Shaheed uses with no missiles alongside, other than a few S-300s, particularly up in the north by Kharkiv, which is not unusual. And they've got plenty of S-300s. So to me, I think... it wouldn't surprise me the Ukrainians did shoot down the A-50 and the Il-22. And actually what they're saying, they're claiming they did it. And actually, I would more favour that account than the Russians shooting their own down. And the fact that they haven't retaliated is because they can't retaliate. And that's evidenced by the fact that they are sending drones, but not huge numbers of drones, just 20 drones, and not sending the missiles. And Andrew Perpetua said the other day, the drone usage that they have, evidence in the last month shows that they have the drones that they are producing about 360 drones a month, and they're basically using them when they produce them or procure them. That's my theory. Prove me wrong. I'm that meme with that guy sitting at the table. This is what I say. Prove me wrong. Right. A Russian truck was involved in building fortifications near the Grivoron checkpoint, which is a place in Belgorod that has been attacked a number of times by the Russian volunteer corps up there. Anyway, it was attacked with an FPV drone and destroyed. So interesting that these vehicles are still being targeted within Russia. There is the ability to hit within that 10, maybe 20 kilometer range of the border. And that must give those something to think about. The Russians something to think about. Sorry, that's not supposed to be playing. Anyway, this is some more footage that come out from a different angle. It's absolutely staggering footage of the 25mm Bushmaster chain gun from a M2A2 Bradley that absolutely hammers this Russian T-90M in Stepova. You've seen it before, or at least I haven't shown it to you, but I've referenced it and linked it. You can press on the links in the description below in order to watch this in full. It's really quite impressive. And as Thomas Tyner says in response to the footage again here, 25 by 137mm rounds fired by a 50-year-old Bushmaster autocannon can defeat Russia's best tank! ! NATO armies are getting 35mm, 40mm, and even 50mm autocannons these days, which would all shred the Russian tank even quicker. It's this idea that, look, if you can shred the best Russian tank with a Bradley, then what does that say about the newer stuff that's coming online? That tank was shredded. I mean, we saw a picture of its turret spinning round and round, and then there were claims, other people have told me, that the reason why that was noted as a destroyed T-90M is that it was then hit subsequently, and there's a supposedly drone footage of it might have been taken out by a drone. I don't know, but it was certainly shredded here and then couldn't really function and then was blown up. That's the theory. Anyway, it's interesting to see what the Russians say. According to the Russian news website, Tsargrad, the T-90M came out victorious in that combat. Just look at the footage. It's being recorded from at least 2 different angles. Leopards never dreamed of it. Bradley beat a Russian tank for 10 minutes and lost. The Russian T-90M tank showed miracles of survivability in the northern military district zone. The American-made Ukrainian Bradley hit him for 10 minutes but lost the battle. Literally not evidenced that. So, yeah, but this is why we need to be careful. People ask me, why don't you, give what the Russians claim are the Ukrainian losses? It's because the Russians talk out their posterior. They've got this kind of mouth sphincter dysphoria going on that you just don't know which one's operating at any one time. Right, moving on to distant strikes here. This is what took place last night. 22 of 33 killer drones fired by Russia were shot down. Air defense managed to take them out. That's 2/3, which is okay, but it's not the best interception rate. There would have been 11 Shaheeds finding their target, and one assumes most of those, I think, with Shaheeds would have been accurately hitting the target, as opposed to some of the missiles they used that apparently are pretty inaccurate. So 11 drones hitting a target is not cool, and also 22 drones falling out of the sky and exploding is also not cool. Successes were reported by defense units in Sumy, Mykolaiv, Kherson, Dnipropetrovsk, Kirovohrad, and Khmelnytsky region. So again, going for Staro-Konstantinov, probably, or possibly Khmelnytsky itself, and industrial defense, military industrial complex infrastructure. So anyway, all of those places being targeted, that would amount to, I don't know, a handful in each of those places. But yeah, again, I don't know if that's So, if I was the Russians, I'd be like 22 all at one place rather than like 5 at each place, unless you know that there's no air defense there. I don't know, but I assume the Russians know more than I do, sitting at my desk in on the south coast of the UK. I mean, who knows? Far be it from me to give them advice. Right. Last night, I wrote about the attack on Chuhiv, in Kharkiv region. Says Tim White, S-300 missiles killed 1 woman. The number of injured has now increased to 3. And the first photos have been released of the attack site. So obviously the Ukrainians only ever release the imagery of missiles that don't hit significant military targets. So there will be a selection bias when you get a sense of what the Russians achieved. But they have at least achieved blowing up people's houses with S-300 missiles. I mean, that's the minimum of what's happened. Whether they hit any military or more important infrastructural targets, I don't know. But they have at least killed a woman. So there you go. Last night, American supplied MIM-23 Hawk medium-range surface-to-air missiles were at work and working by all accounts. These are old, these were used prior to the Vietnam War, right? So these are old bits of kit, but they have been consistently upgraded, and there are lots of these around the world. And there was talk, I remember sharing with you, for those of you that have been with me since the beginning, I had a video chat with JR last night, just, catching up on stuff, and he was telling me that he came over from my philosophical channel, like watching all my philosophical stuff, and then coming along with me on the war things. And it was just great to have a chat with him. It's just amazing to think that people have gone on this whole journey and invested so much time with me in this subject, and I'm ever so grateful for all of those who have. But in the early days, I shared with you a Trent Zelenko thread about how there are so many of these around the world that these should have been what, say, the US gathered around, being US bits of kit originally, and said, right, we're going to get this from here, 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 here. There was talk about loads of them being in Taiwan and being given to Ukraine, but then Taiwan, I think, didn't get them in the end. Nonetheless, Spain has given a bunch of these. There are loads of these that would be really useful. But actually, although I thought they'd partly done that, it actually turns out that they only got these relatively late. And possibly another example of things taking a lot longer than really they should do to get to Ukraine. Now, in terms of what the Ukrainians did last night, it was very significant, because it's the first time that St. Petersburg has been targeted, I believe, with a drone attack. So St. Petersburg oil terminal was hit, and wreckage also fell on the seaport where fire broke out. I don't know how much damage, if any, was done, how much meaningful damage. Last night, a drone attacked St. Petersburg for the first time since the beginning of the war, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation said. According to the Russian Telegram channels, this night the drone fell on the territory of St. Petersburg oil terminal, oil and gas company. Pulkovo Airport has stopped working. At the same time, Moscow was also attacked per the video below. There are no losses according to the Russian authorities. So the Russians, as you'd imagine, are saying there are no losses. But there is video evidence that, there were strikes on St. Petersburg and Moscow, but who knows how successful those strikes were. The mayor of Moscow reported that air defense forces in the Russian city of Podolsk allegedly shot down a drone flying in the direction of the Russian capital. So on the way to Moscow, there was supposedly some shooting down of Ukrainian drones there. So I think that's important that the Ukrainians have been doing that. Earlier this evening, Russia claimed it brought down also 2 Tochka-U missiles over Bryansk region. So that's on the northern border of Ukraine. No injuries or damage was reported by Russia. Who knows how much damage was done by the Ukrainians? It's a bit like what I reported earlier with regard to the patrol ship. Is sometimes really big targets get taken out and we don't know about it, because the Ukrainians know where the targets are and they'll hit them. But especially if you're going into Russia, unless you've got really good satellite imagery that's very current, you can't sight that with other drones, right? Realistically, whereas much closer to the front line, like in on the front line, you've got spotter drones all over the shot, and so you can tell what's being blown up. Places like Crimea, where that's further, you're sending the drones in or sending missiles in, and they either hit the target or they don't hit the target, and you don't really know until imagery comes out. So when imagery came out of the ship being blown up recently, or the ship and the submarine in dry dock in Sevastopol, so Feodosia, Sevastopol, lots of people are throwing out imagery of that's how you find out from randoms that are recording that. Occasionally you might have partisans recording it, but basically it's randoms. Now, if randoms just didn't maybe know about that patrol ship, or just didn't upload footage of it, then actually people don't know whether it was taken out or not. Maybe the Ukrainians do, but for some reason they're keeping it quiet. I don't know. You'd think they could have pretty good satellite imagery of what's going on in Sevastopol, but nonetheless. Okay, on to other bits and pieces. In Novosibirsk, Russia, again, a huge fountain of boiling water is seen due to another communal accident. A part of the city is left without heating, Russian media reports. The city hall called the bursting a quote defect. Novosibirsk faced another utility crisis. About 2,500 houses where more than 500,000 people are living without heating supply. 500,000 people. The temperature during the night dropped to minus 28 degrees. Again, according to as a result of that defect. So things are looking challenging still in parts of Russia. Now, here is another little segment of this is what freedom looks like. This is what freedom looks like in Russia. Russian parliament proposed to punish divorces by sending people to the SMO zone or a fine of 100,000 rubles, about $1,100. Quote, a fine of 100,000 rubles or compulsory labour in the SMO zone. We should penalise divorce, and marriage is natural. It is a celebration, the MP Milanov said. What are you doing? What are you doing? I don't know. I presume this is their attempt to just get people pumping out children. And apparently children born in unhappy marriages are still children. And they're more likely to get children born in an unhappy marriage than in a separation or, in a divorced setup. I guess that's what is driving that. Okay, Russia stole millions of metric tons of grain worth billions of dollars from occupied Ukraine, formerly owned by sanctioned GTLK, now by Astrakhan-based Salmi, so that's a port on the Caspian Sea, I believe. Russian flag bulker Zafar transited the Bosphorus Straits en route from occupied Sevastopol to Syria, carrying stolen soft wheat. I mean, goodness me. Yeah, it's not cool there, not cool. And here we have some more propaganda from propagandists on Russian state TV. So the Kremlin wants to sound a little bit more sane and realistic for a day or two, following Medvedev's latest genocidal rant about Ukraine. So yesterday, if you remember, I reported Medvedev just, as I said, all you need to do is listen to what the Russians are saying and listen to what the Ukrainians are saying and get an idea as to who the good guys are and who the bad guys. And the good guys are not Russia. When you have someone as important as Medvedev is in the Russian government saying, basically expressing genocidal intentions on Ukraine, I don't understand what the world is doing. Why the world is dithering, just in general, and why other nations like India and China don't go, oh yeah, no, that is genocide. Of course, they recognise that, but it's obviously more convenient for them to just bury their heads in the sand. Nonetheless, don't mistake this for a change in attitude from up top, though. As Mr. Bennett said, it'll pass, no doubt, more quickly than it should. So what are they saying again? Well, I find this quite interesting. One of the propagandists saying, like it or not, I think Ukraine will remain in some form. Because we don't have enough military power, she asks. It will remain because the level of resistance is high. So that's interesting. So one, he's going against the idea that they are going to completely destroy Ukraine. So this is the admission that the intention is to completely destroy Ukraine. But he said, however, like it or not, it will remain in some form. What? Because our military is too crap? Or we don't have enough of it. No, because actually they're really good at resisting. And so it's not to deny that their military isn't good enough, by the way. So it's just a really interesting read between the lines kind of interaction there. Anyway, GPS signal disruptions were reported over Poland, with significant disruptions in Pila and Konin and moderate in Poznan. Similar accidents occurred in Finland and Estonia. According to John Wiseman from GPS Jam, it could be a deliberate Russian jamming attempt or a military exercise. Russia has jamming systems within range in the Königsberg region. Königsberg is Kaliningrad. So Kaliningrad is that exclave that borders the Baltic Sea, but there is a gap between Kaliningrad and Belarus, and that gap being Poland, and that's the what's it called? The thingy strait, the corridor. Anyway, nonetheless, the Russians are seemingly capable of jamming GPS for quite a large area there, if that is emanating from Kaliningrad. So yes, something to take note of. And then this isn't news, but just kind of a bit of a reflection here. Mike Sapperton says, on some days I just can't stop thinking that this whole misery and inhumane tragedy happened because of nothing. Nothing was threatening Russia in 2008, 2014 or 2022. There are literally 0 countries that are ready to attack it. Perfectly safe and totally crazy. Millions of people lost their homes and are displaced for no reason. Ukraine's internal politics was never even a remote threat to Russia. NATO was never going to set sight on Ukraine. Russians just regained their paranoia on not letting people live their lives. And I kind of agree with that. It's like, yeah, you can talk about the encroachment in NATO, and yeah, you can no one was threatening Russia. You still have a stranglehold on the Russian people, Putin. You're still extorting gazillions of rubles out of the state to become the richest man in the world. Like, you have had all of your life a state job, FSB, mayor, prime minister and president, prime minister. All of those things shouldn't make you the richest person on earth. If you got involved in private enterprise outside of that, then fair enough, but there's no evidence of that. You have turned your positions into extracting money out of the state. You have stolen that money from the state. And you have that control over them. No one was really threatening you, yet now we're here. This is where we're at. And I'm fed up of people coming to me blaming Ukraine for this. This is at your feet, Putin. This is at your feet. And the fact that there's an impasse in Congress just depresses the hell out of me. We need international unity now more than ever before. Look at the stuff that's going on around the world. Look at what's going on in Pakistan, Iran, Yemen, Israel, Palestine, the Sahel region of Africa, Venezuela and Guyana. Look at all this stuff. And we're arguing about other things. You can argue about those other things and you can debate that and you can try and get that reform done. But you need to do this too. Walk and chew gum. Because if you're not going to walk, things are going to go south. So we're at an inflection point, and we're there really for no good reason. And that's depressing. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Thanks for being along with me on this journey. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.